Welcome to the course of Spring Boot with ReactJs. In this project, we are going to build an application which will be looking something like this. Backend of the application that we are using is Java along with Spring Boot framework. And for designing the front end of the application, we are using ReactJs. So this may look like a simple application, but in the process of making this project, you will be learning so many basic concepts of Spring Boot and React.js. And also you will be learning how we give a look and feel to this application. So let's have a look at what we are going to build and what we need for that. So the first thing that we need is a Spring Tool Suite, that is an IDE for writing a Spring Boot application. The second thing is the Visual Studio Code that we will be using for writing the front end of our application, that is React.js. If you are having any other editors in your machine, then that's also fine. Other things are you will be needing JVM, JRE for running the backend of our application, and for running the React.js you will be obviously needing the Node.js, NPM, and things like that. So we assume that you are already having a basic code editor for writing a front end and back end, and also we assume that you have the basic environment setup. So now let's look at the project structure that we have in here. So our project is divided into three parts: the back end of the application, the front end, that is React.js, and there will be an end user who is going to use this application. So if a end user making a request, he will be getting a UI, right? So in the UI he is making one request, and the UI is our user service application. So this user service application is nothing but it is going to fetch the data from somewhere and display it to the user. So it is going to fetch this data from the backend. Okay, so the backend of our application is a Spring Boot application. This Spring Boot application is also going to fetch some data from a database, that is a H2 database, and once it gets the data from the database, it transfers the data to the user service application, and the user service application will transfer the data to the end user. So now we are going to implement this in our practical section. Let's move to the practical section of this tutorial. The Spring Tool Suite, and we are going to create the backend of our application. So we will be creating a Spring Boot application. So how do you create a Spring Boot application? There are two ways to create. One is by going to the Spring Initializer website, and from there you can create it. Other simple way is by creating it in the Spring Tool Suite. You have to just click on the file, click on new, and Spring Starter project. So basically that will give you option to create a Spring Boot project. So this window will come. You should be having an active internet connection. Let's name our application. This is the backend, so I will give user backend. So this is the name of the application. Now the type here is Maven. The packaging will be jar, and we are using Java 8 version. So the group ID we have given com.technodev, and the package naming we will give it frontend, and description you can give anything whatever you want. After that, click on the next button, and in this section we can see that the Spring Boot version that we are going to use is 2.4.3, and we have to add some more dependencies to our project, and those dependencies will be web. Select a Spring Web. The next dependency will be H2, a in-memory database that we will be using for storing our users. Our DevTools, so that we don't have to start our server again and again after making changes. Our changes will automatically get picked, and we don't have to start our server again and again. And the next thing is JPA. So we have taken these four dependencies. Now click on finish button. So after clicking on the finish button, it will start downloading the dependencies from internet. You can see the progress in the progress bar here, and we will wait for the dependencies to get downloaded. Dependency download is completed, and we have got a project here. Let's open the project and see what all things we have got as a Spring Boot starter project. So first of all, the pom.xml, let's open it and see what is the problem here. We will ignore this error, that is some issue with the Spring Tool Suite. Okay, let's see what all the dependency we have got. We have got a Spring Boot starter data JPA, and the starter web dependency, the DevTools dependency, and the S2 dependency. By default, when you add this web dependency, a test will be generated. So this is all there in form.xml. Now let's see other folders. We have got a source folder where we will be writing our Java code, the resource folder, and the test folder where we will be writing our Java test. The Maven dependency that got downloaded as a part of the initial download, all the jars will be coming here. There are a lot of them. And the JRE library, that is the Java libraries that is by default picking up from our local system, and Java 1.8 is there. So for the Spring Boot project, you will be seeing annotation with the boot here, and we have added a dependency DevTools. That's why it is coming here. First of all, we will make sure that our application is running fine and there are no errors. So for that, we will be going to run as and Spring Boot application. If our application launch is fine, then we will ignore this error in the POM and we will move forward. So our application is started and we have a web dependency. That means that our embedded Tomcat is also started on port 8080. That means that we don't have any problem with our application. Now let's move with the development of our services. We'll stop it. Let's check the source folder once. What all things we have got. By default, we have got a class which is having a main method, and inside that we have a run method that is responsible for starting our Spring Boot project. First of all, what we want to build in our project. So we want to build an application which will be displaying the list of all the users. So for that, we need to have a users in our application. So let's define a class which will be having our users, and we will name this class as user. Click on the finish button. Okay, so in this user class, we will be having few fields. The first field is a ID field that will be private, long ID, then the first name, the last name, and the email. Okay, we will be keeping only 4 fields here, and we will be annotating this class with an entity annotation, and whenever we are performing any JPA operations, it will consider this as a table. If we don't specify the table name, it will be taking the table name as user. But here let's specify our table name, and inside this we will give the name of the table as name equals users. Now in every table you need to have a primary key, and ID is our primary key here, so we will annotate it with the annotation ID Java X persistence, and we don't want to assign a primary key every time manually, so we will keep the generation strategy as auto generated value strategy generation type dot auto. So it will automatically generate a unique ID and we don't have to worry about giving any ID. So for this table, we will keep everything as default. We will not provide any column names. So it will take the column name as first name, last name, and email as it is. The next thing we can do is generating the setters and getters for this class. Right click here and go to the source, and after that generate getters and setters. And in this one, we will select all, and we have our setters and getters in place. Now we can generate a constructor for this. Again, right click and generate a constructor using field, and we will not consider ID because ID is automatically getting generated, and click on generate. So it has made a constructor for us. Now organize the imports by pressing Ctrl Shift O on Windows and click on the save button. So our user is created. One more thing, we will be keeping everything in a separate layers. So we will create a package and we will name that as a model, and we will keep the user class in that model. And you can drag and drop this user class in the models package. Okay, now the next thing is our data access layer. We will be creating that in a package called DAO, and this will be basically a interface. So the name of the interface will be user repository, and click on the finish button. Remove this class and write it interface. and we will annotate this interface as repository. So this will be responsible for performing any database operations, and this interface will extend JPA repository, and this T is the name of the table, that is user here, and this user we have to import it. This is coming from the model. The ID of the user is of the type long. Okay, so our repository is created, and this layer will be used for performing any kind of default database operations. Okay, now let's move to the next one, that is creating a controller for accessing the data. So that we will also separate it in a different layer, and we will name that as controller layer, and we will name the class as user controller. Now click on finish. So this will generate a controller class. We will annotate this class as a REST controller, and in this class we will have a method that will be displaying the list of users. So this method will be public, and it will return a list of users. Okay, and this we will be making a get method, and the endpoint that we will expose is users list. Now obviously we have to return the type of user. First we will import it, and we will have to return the type user. So, and what operation we will be performing, we will be taking the data from the database. So our user repository is responsible for performing any database operations, and we will auto wire this in our controller class, and the class name is user repository, variable user repo. Okay, and using this variable we will be performing the database operation to get the list of users. So it has a default methods, that is find all. So find all method will be giving all the list of users from the database, and we will return the same thing. Okay, so whatever is returned from the database, that will be coming in the form of a array list. So we have to make this user as a list. So list of users. Okay, now save our application. And one last thing that we have to do is we need to put some values in the database. So here we are using the H2 database, that is an in-memory database. We don't have to install anything locally. The data will be created once the application starts and destroyed after the application shuts down. At the starting of application, we need to feed something in the database. That we can do it in our main class by implementing an interface, that is command line runner. It's a functional interface that is having only one implementation, and that will be having only a run method that we have to implement it. So when this run method will start, we have to feed some data into the database. How do we feed the data? We have to perform some save operations. So we will be making use of this user repository to save the data. We will auto wire it, the same thing that we have done here. We will take this and we will keep it in our main application. Okay, and now using this user repository we can perform a save operation. User repo.default.save, that is the method that is provided by JPA repository, and the entity name. The entity name is our user repository. The entity name is our user. So we'll be saving a new object of user with the constructor, the first name, the last name, and the email. So the first name we will give it as anything, maybe Tom, the last name Cruz, and the email anything you can give. Okay, and when our application will run, it will perform this operation and save something in the database. That also we will see in some time. Let's add some more users. Okay, so we have added these 4 users, and we will save our application. Okay, now let's go to the resource folder here, and we can enable the H2 database. How we can enable? We have to provide dot h2 dot console dot enabled equals to true. Okay, and the next thing is we have to give the driver JDBC driver class name data source dot URL, and the URL we will be giving is JDBC colon h2 colon mem colon testdb. Just save it, and we are done with our backend application. Let's run our application just by right clicking and going to run as Spring Boot app. So the application has launched up fine without any errors. And let's go to the database. You have to go to your browser and type in localhost colon 8080 slash h2 hyphen console. Okay, so this will open up this windows, and now you need to give the JDBC URL that you have given in your application, and we have given JDBC h2 memdb testdb. We'll go and paste it here. Okay, now let's test the connection. It says that database memdb not found. Okay, so you don't have to worry, you can just go to the application, and in the logs you will be getting a link for accessing your h2 database application. Okay, so database available at this URL. Just copy this URL and go to the database and paste it in JDBC URL. And now test the connection. The connection is successful. Click on connect and you will be able to see this users table. When you click on users table and select star from the users, click on run, and you will be able to see the same data that we have persisted at the start of our application from the command line interface. Now let's go to test our application. How we can test the REST application? Default port for Spring Boot application is localhost 8080, and our endpoint that we have exposed in our application controller. Go to the controller. So the endpoint that we have exposed is users list, and we will give it here users list. Press on enter. So after that we are getting the white level page error, and we are going to check one by one what is the cause of this error. No default constructor for entity. So for the user entity that we have not defined any default constructor, and that's why we are getting this error. So let's go to our user class and define a default constructor, and we have defined a default constructor. Let's comment it. So in the user we have defined a default constructor. Now our application will automatically restart once we save it. Okay, so application is again started, and let's go to our web browser and click on refresh button. So now we have got the list of all the users here. We can see whatever we had in the database, the same things are coming on the browser. So this completes our backend of the service, and our endpoint, that is user list, is exposed at port 8080, and in the front end of the application we will make use of this URL to get the list of all the users and display it in the browser very well formatted manner. Now we are going to create the front end of our application. So for the front end of our application, we will be using ReactJs. So the first things first, for making the backend of our application, we were using the Spring Tool suite, and for making the front end, we'll be using Visual Studio Code. So if you don't have, you can just download and start writing on Visual Studio Code. Let me give the prerequisite to you, what all things we required. First of all, I will go to the working directory where I'm going to write the front end of our code. I am going to use this ReactJs workspace, and here I will be writing the code. So the prerequisite here is, one is I have already told, the Visual Studio Code. The second thing is you need to have something called Node installed in your system. If you want to check if you have Node in your system, just type in cmd. From any location you can type. Okay, so I will type node hyphen version. If you are getting the version here, that means that node is already installed in your system. If you are getting command not recognized, that means that your node is either not installed or the environment is not set up. So you need to have this node in your system. The second thing is you need to have either npm or npx. If you are using a Mac system, then you have to check if yarn is already installed in your system. In my system, I already have the npm. Let me check the npm version. So if you are getting the version of npm, that means that npm is already installed in your system. So likewise, these three are the prerequisite. The Node.js, the npm must be installed, and you need to have Visual Studio Code. or any IDE that supports writing React.js applications. Let's see how we can create a React.js application. You need to type npx create react app and the name of the application. Here I'm going to give the name of the application as React Frontend. Now click on enter and this will start creating an application. It will download all the dependencies. It will make a project structure and it will be totally ready for us for writing the code. So it's installing all the packages. After that it will create a folder here whose name will be React Frontend. You can see React Frontend. This is the project that is created. So give it some time. It will download all the required dependencies for you and it will be ready in just a matter of few minutes. So after spending some reasonable amount of time, finally I have got a project that is created successfully. Let me show you. We have got this React front-end application which has all these predefined files and folders. Now we haven't done any coding yet, but we can run this application now also. How we can run the application to make sure that it is correctly generated? See here the commands are cd react frontend. We are navigating inside this folder and after that we are giving npm start. Click on enter and this will start the embedded server and your project will be launched. So let's see. So it has opened a new tab where the address is localhost 3000. That is the default port for React.js application. And we have got a nice looking logo in here. So this is what we get when we create a project using create React app. So now let me stop this server. Click on Control C. Yes. Okay, so I have stopped. Now we are going to do all our coding in Microsoft Visual Studio Code. So how do you open a code from this location? Just type in code if you already have that installed in your system and press enter and this will open a Visual Studio Code. After that, if your folder is not listed here, what you can do, you can just click on this open folder. You can go to file and open folder and after that select the folder where your code is located. So my code is located in React.js workspace React frontend and I will select this folder. Okay, so I have got all the required files in here. We have got a package.json file contains all the required dependencies for a React.js project. And most importantly, you can check all the versions of the dependencies that are available here. And this is pretty much about your dependencies. So it's like a form.xml. Okay. So the next thing is the public folder you can see here. And this public folder, if you open it, you will see so many things in here. So the logo that you were seeing on the web is nothing but this logo. Okay, this might be some other logo. Okay, it contains a file called index.html. So as you know that React is used to build a single page application. So this index.html will render all our components. Next thing is the src folder. If you see here, this file will contain all the global components that we are going to use in this application. It can be app.js, all the global JavaScript along with the CSS files. Index.js here, this is the top render component of a React application. You will also see a node module here. All the packages that are installed by npm will be listed in here. Okay, so we have got familiar with the project structure. Now you can see app.js here. This contains the definition of our application that gets rendered on our browser. Currently we're seeing a default logo of this React.js. That is because this is rendered in here. If you remove all these tags, you will not be able to see anything in here. Let me remove from here. Okay, and now save it. Now if you go to run this application, I think we have already stopped it. Let me start our application. So for that we have to go to terminal, new terminal. Okay, and this terminal is our React front end. Okay, so here we have to give npm start. So this will again start up our application and it will show this web page. It will not show the logo now. It will simply show a blank space because we have removed the logo code from there. Hopefully we're clear about the basic package structure, files and folders that we get by default. Now let's move to the next step. Let me stop the server once again. Click on Control C and press yes. Okay, so the next thing that we are going to do is we are going to add one more dependency, that is bootstrap. So how do we install a new dependency or package? You have to give npm install, and after that you have to give bootstrap and save. Click on enter and it will start downloading the dependencies from internet. Okay, so the bootstrap is downloaded. So whatever the things that we are downloading, we have to go and add it in our index.js. Okay, in here we are going to import bootstrap. So we are basically making the use of this bootstrap to get the css classes that are available in bootstrap. So you have to add this statement import, and in the single quotes you have to give this address bootstrap slash dist slash css slash bootstrap min.css. All this code will be available on my website and the link will be given in the description. Okay, so this is how our index.js will look like. In the backend of our application, we have exposed one API, that is users API, to get the list of all the users. And from the ReactJs application, we are going to consume that API. So for that, we are going to use something called axios. So we have to add axios in our front-end application. So how do we add axios? In the terminal, you have to go and type npm add axios and click on enter. So this will basically add axios to your working directory. So we have made axios available for us to use it in our application. And now we are going to create a new folder inside this src, and we will name it services. And inside this services folder, we will create a JavaScript file and we will name it user services. We will give this class the class name. The class name is user services. This is the same way how we do it in Java. And we are also going to define the URL from it where it is going to fetch the data. So we will be giving that in our constant. So how do we define a constant? Let's say const. The name of the constant user REST API URL, and the URL that is from where it is going to pick the data, that is http://localhost:8080, and after that API that we exposed, get all users. We will cross check that while running the application. Okay, so we are going to use the axios, so we have to import it, right? Import axios from where axios. Now we are going to define a method inside this class that will actually make use of axios and fetch the data from that URL. So the method we will define is get users and return axios.get, and inside this get we are going to pass this URL. Okay, and we are done. We just have to export this, whatever the class we make, export either that class or the object of that class. So we'll give a statement export default and new object of user service. Okay, so we are done with our user service class. Let me make one more folder here and we will name that as components. So basically in components, what we will do, once we get the data from the user service, we will write some tags to arrange that data in a format that can be understandable. So in the components, we are going to create a new JS file, that is user components.js. Click on enter. So first of all, define the class, and the class name is user components. It will extend React component. Okay, but we don't have this React in here, so we have to import it. Okay, now we are also going to make use of user service class. So let me import this class as well. The next thing that we have to do is define a constructor. So this constructor we will define, which will take props, and after that we are calling the super, and we are returning this state in an array of users. Okay, we are done with the props. Now the next thing that we are going to use is a method that is ComponentDidMount. So let me first write the method and I will explain about it, what it does. ComponentDidMount. So we'll write it here after the constructor. So this ComponentDidMount is called immediately after the component is mounted. You can say this as a hook that gets invoked right after the component has been mounted after the first render lifecycle. So it is called only once in a lifecycle before the execution of render method. You should also know that this is primarily used to implement server-side logic. before the actual rendering happens. In the simple terms, you can understand that we are making a call to an external server, that is our Spring Boot application. So before rendering the results onto the browser, we have to call this method. So inside this method, we are going to write some logic where we will be calling this user service. Let me write it in a smaller case to differentiate. This is not a class, we are using the reference. Okay, so user service, and inside this we have a method called get users. Okay, then response, and that's it about component did mount. Now we are going to call the render method, that will actually do the rendering for us. So in the render method we will have some div tags and table rows columns. We will call a render method, and inside this render method we are going to return HTML components. We'll have a navbar and the background of it will be black and variant as dark. These all classes are coming from Bootstrap. We will also have to import Bootstrap into our project. So we'll close this. Inside this navbar we will be having a brand identifier, and this will be capital navbar.brand, and we will have a href element where we will be giving it a home, and we will name it as name of my channel. Okay, so instead of typing each line one by one, I will just copy and paste this whole navbar item so that it will be easy for you as well as me to save some time. So I'm going to paste the HTML elements that I'm using in this tutorial. You can give a look at it and explain what all things we have done. We have just made a navbar brand. We have used the class auto so that it will automatically adjust the width. Then the links I have given, the home, the feature, the pricing. Okay, next thing is I have given a form for search bar that we will be seeing that in some time what all things. Okay, the next thing is we have added a table. So the class of that table is stripped table, that is coming from a bootstrap. One thing we have not done, we have not imported the bootstrap. Let's go and import it. So the import statement we will give it at the top. Okay, so the components that we are using here is navbar, nav, form control, and the button. So these all things I have used. If you are not using any of it, then you probably might get some error on the web page. Okay, so the next thing is the table. We have given the t head is for table heading. Then the table rows, the heading rows are user ID, the first name, last name, and the email ID. And in the body we have got the state of the user, and we are just using a map to map the keys with the proper heading element. So this is the thing that we have done, and after that we have closed the body, the table, the div. Okay, the final thing that we have to do is that we have to export this class. So we have to write the export statement, user components, and we are done with our user components. Now in the app.js we have to pass these user components. So how do we pass user components here? User components, and we have to close it. Okay, so the user components is automatically imported, and we are done with our application. Check the output, but we see this in the red line. There is an error here. We have to give this symbol user services. This should be services here, the name of the class. Okay, and one more thing is React Bootstrap. We have not downloaded the dependency, so we have to download it, and the command is npm install react bootstrap save. So it has downloaded React Bootstrap. Let's go to our Spring Boot application, and let me cross check the endpoint that we have given. And the endpoint is, so we have to make the changes accordingly here, user service. And let's start our application, and we will start first. Okay, so our backend part of the application is started. Let's go and check if we are getting any data from localhost 8080 users list, and we have got this data. Now let's go and run the front end part of our application, and we will just type here npm start. So our application is started on port 3000, and we have got a very good looking website, but we are not getting the data. We'll look after that. First of all, you see these are coming from the React Bootstrap. Okay, and let's see why we are not getting the data. So we'll go to the console. Okay, so we are getting this access to XML HTTP request. This is a problem of the cross domain where two different applications are interacting. It will be blocked by the CORS policy. So we have to make some change in our application so that it will not find this as a cross domain application. It will treat as the same application. So for that we have to go to our Spring Boot, and in our controller we have to give this annotation cross origin. We have to import this. Okay, and this is the URL of our front end application. After giving this, let me restart the application. So our application is started and our front end is running. Let me refresh it, and you can see that we are getting the data that we were getting from the backend. So this was the very beginner friendly tutorial where we have learned very basics about how a ReactJs application interacts with the backend application. Now, if you want me to continue with this series of tutorial, you can suggest me the things that I can do with this website, and I can be adding different modules to it, maybe the security module, login module, all these things we can add. But for that, I need your support. If you support me, then only I can proceed with this kind of tutorials. So I request you to kindly subscribe to this channel and what all the modification you want with this tutorial so that I can continue with the next tutorials. Don't worry about the code. You will get the code from my GitHub account or from my website, and the link will be given in the description. So that's it for this session. Thanks for watching.